A special thanks to 41 people who helped make this review possible. Cheers. Hey everyone, welcome to Lachlan Likes a Thing, the show where I take a thing and see whether or not I like it. Now the thing we're looking at in this video are the Havi B3 Pro 1 dual dynamic driver in-ear earphones. And there are a number of versions of this earphone floating around, so just to clarify, I am reviewing the original Pro 1 version of this earphone, not the updated Pro 2 version, which apparently is less popular. This is the original Pro 1, which I bought for $60 US from the eBay seller Big Bargain Online. And at the beginning of this review, I want to address the big elephant in the room. Yes, I have seen the measurements of these earphones that have been posted on Inner Fidelity and also on the audio forum Chankstar, which I will link in the description of this video. Yes, the measurements look terrible, and they display, among other things, they seem to indicate that the Havi B3 Pro 1s, quite a lot of these earphones have channel imbalance issues, or at least the ones that were tested for the measurements. And I will say right now that it appears that my pair also has channel imbalance issues. The right earphone does seem louder, it does seem bassier and fuller in sound than the left earphone. Now honestly, I did not pick this up until I saw the measurements and I listened on my own pair just to see if there were channel imbalance issues. It's not something that's as easily noticed when you have both earpieces in and you're listening to music, but if you listen to one earpiece exclusively on my pair, I can tell that there is a difference when I listen to each one by itself. So you can reject the rest of this review as a review of a broken pair of Havi B3 Pro 1s. I personally don't think the channel balance issue is severe enough for me to, you know, say that my opinions on this earphone aren't going to be particularly helpful, and I think that my opinions on this earphone are roughly consistent with the kind of things that I've read or the reviews that I've seen of this earphone. So take from that what you will. If you really think that's an issue, please leave a comment and I will see if I can get these earphones replaced with another pair that hopefully won't have channel imbalance issues, and I'll post an updated set of impressions, but at this point I can't promise anything. But anyway, let's get right into the design. For a $60 earphone, the Havi B3 Pro 1 is actually built very well. It has a nice fit and finish to all the plastic parts, and a special highlight is the Gorilla Glass faceplates, which show off the Havi logo, which looks oddly like the logo of another major German audio manufacturer. See if you can guess which one. The one complaint that I can make about the B3 Pro 1 is that the stock silicone tips that come with the earphone are too hard. They have this kind of papery feel, and I personally prefer to use Sony hybrid tips with this earphone. Now, the earphone itself is relatively lightweight and it's quite comfortable provided you have the right tips. The flat cable I thought would be an issue, but it turns out it actually isn't too bad. It isn't particularly heavy. It just happens to look like a parallel ATA cable from an old computer. Isolation, because the B3 Pro 1 is a completely sealed design, is quite good on this earphone. So overall, I like the design of this earphone. I think it's quite a nice little package. So let's talk about the sound of the B3 Pro 1, and the key word that I'm looking for with the sound of this earphone is broad. And what I mean by that is that the sound of this earphone has this kind of broad, even sort of distribution of frequencies. I'm not going to say it's flat, but what kind of spikes or bumps in the frequency response seem to be pretty spread out over the frequency range. So the dominant kind of sound in the Pro 1 is this kind of lower mid emphasis, which is this gentle kind of lower in male vocals. It seems to have a slight emphasis in that region. Treble on the Pro 1 doesn't seem particularly emphasized. There's no specific spike, but there is a sort of dryness a slight edge to everything that you know, gives it a bit of detail. Overall though, the treble section is not particularly forward and it's not particularly emphasized. The same way, the bass is, it seems to go quite deep, but it's not particularly punchy or aggressive or, you know, forward in any way. So this is an earphone that's going to be, I wouldn't say necessarily it's flat, but it is an earphone with a sort of even, gentle kind of spread of frequencies. Now, it's also a signature that actually, because there's no specific bumps in the frequency range, you can actually turn up the volume higher on this earphone than you would with other earphones, and I actually find that you kind of have to do that because the earphone is not quite as sensitive as a lot of other earphones that I've tried. I think that the earphone actually sounds quite nice. It has this euphonic, mellow, almost analog kind of quality to it, but there's enough crispiness to the treble that gives everything a nice sense of detail. So let's return to the question of measurements, and I should state at this point my kind of general philosophy with measurements. Now, I find measurements really, really useful tools, provided that you interpret them correctly. I find them very useful tools in terms of giving you guidance as to what to look for when you're listening to an earphone. They can show you visually any kind of problems with an earphone, things like big spikes in the frequency response, things like poor kind of transient response in the lower frequencies, things like lots of harmonic distortion or decay, you know, any of those kinds of things. But even with all those measurements, sometimes those measurements can be quite misleading as to how the final earphone will sound when you put it in your ears. So I use measurements as a general guide, and I'm aware that sometimes when you look at measurements, they can actually bias your opinion about what you actually hear, because even if the paper is, you know, even if the numbers are on paper, your subjective evaluation of the earphone is always going to be affected by various factors, including your, you know, subjective interpretation of objective measurements. So at this point, having seen the measurements of the B3 Pro 1, which look absolutely terrible, I can't disentangle my interpretation of the sound from the measurements that I've seen, and I'm not going to try to, because I'm just going to do my head in. What I can do is I can give you my sort of interpretation of how the measurements relate to what I'm hearing with the B3 Pro 1. Now, something that's turned up in the measurements of this earphone are that this earphone, along with channel imbalance issues, these earphones have a very high level of harmonic distortion, and they seem to have a sloppy kind of transient response in the low frequency, so they aren't actually, you know, faithfully recreating the lower frequencies in terms of how the driver is actually moving. Now, I actually think that it seems to be the case with what I'm hearing on the B3 Pro 1s, and I'm not going to say it means that it sounds terrible, but I'm going to say that it sounds, I think part of what gives the B3 Pro 1 this kind of euphonic, slightly fuzzy, kind of analog sound, which is sort of enveloping in some senses, it's this warm afterglow of total harmonic distortion, and I think it's the same kind of thing that makes people really like tube amplifiers or vintage lenses or Instagram filters or that kind of thing. It applies a certain kind of a color to the sound, which is in some senses it's an aesthetic kind of thing, and in other senses it is indeed a form of distortion. Now, I liked these earphones before I saw the measurements, and after I saw the measurements, I still like these earphones, but I have to say that seeing the measurements does give me sort of a sense of surprise at what I'm hearing with my own ears. So I'm going to just say that this earphone, because of the measurements, it confuses me. I like the sound of it, but I know that the measurements are bad, and I'm just going through this kind of back and forth of trying to, you know, resolve those two things in my mind, and I can't necessarily try to do that. So I'm just going to leave it at saying these earphones confuse me, and instead of trying to claim that I have golden ears or anything like that, I'm just going to tell you that They probably do have distortion products that sort of give you a weird sense of euphony or kind of an enveloping kind of soundstage with this earphone. That's the best I can do really for this earphone. I think when it's all said and done, this earphone does sound unique. It has a unique you know, sort of balance of frequencies. This is not going to be the earphone that I'm going to recommend to people who want the absolute best technical performance for their $60, and for them I'd point them to, you know, things like the VSonic VSD3 or a bunch of other kind of in-ear earphones around that price point. But I have to say, as someone who kind of collects earphones, or if you are someone who kind of enjoys listening to different things, I actually think it's worth having a listen to these for $60 because they do have a really kind of, you know, again for the same reason why people might like vinyl or anything like that, they do have this kind of warm and fuzzy feeling to them, which I think makes them a really pleasant listen. And I think the design is actually quite good as well. So overall, you know, I like these earphones and I'm gonna recommend them. So anyway, take from that what you will. Thanks to all my regular viewers, thanks to all my regular subscribers, and if you found this review helpful, I'm not sure if it actually was, but if you did find it helpful, please consider popping a tip in the tip jar. These reviews are, you know, supported by you guys. You can talk to me on Facebook at facebook.com/LachlanLikesAthing or on Twitter at LachlanLikesAthing, and happy listening.